Shortly after Franklin Delano Roosevelt of New York ran unsuccessfully for vice president in 1920, he became quite ill. Within a few days, he could not use his legs and spent the rest of his life unable to do so. And later, when he became president, most people did not know that he could not walk or stand without heavy leg braces and considerable assistance. He'd been diagnosed by his physicians with a terrible disease called poliomyelitis. Typically struck children, getting it the nickname of infantile paralysis. Roosevelt decided he wanted to do something about polio, so he established a foundation to care for polio victims and to promulgate research on this. And to head this foundation, he asked his former law partner and very close friend, Basil O'Connor, somebody described him as a bulldog of a man, to take charge of this foundation. O'Connor would spend the next 2 decades working tirelessly to try to figure out how to get a vaccine for this terrible disease. Well, what you need is money. And unfortunately, we were mired in the Great Depression at the time. And the usual sources for funding for research into disease had all dried up. So O'Connor went to Roosevelt and he said, look, we've got to find a new way to come up with money to fight polio. We've got to get every American to be willing to donate to this cause. And Roosevelt said, well, how are we going to do that? And O'Connor said, we're going to scare the hell out of the public. And so he initiated a campaign of public relations, movie shorts, radio pieces, later television pieces, showing little children with leg braces, later on people in iron lungs, literally to frighten the American people about this. And we didn't need much frightening because everybody was afraid of polio.
Infantile paralysis. That might have been me, or your little boy or girl. It strikes the poor and the rich. No one is safe from infantile paralysis, no matter who you are or what kind of home you live in.
O'Connor asked every American to send a dime to the president. The first year, $1.8 million worth of small change arrived at the White House. By the end of the 1940s, more than $22 million a year was pouring into the March of Dimes campaign, as it was called. Well, many scientists thought that a vaccine for polio was impossible. Others said it may be possible, but it'll be years and years in the making. But O'Connor was convinced that it could be done. So in 1949, he promised that there would be a vaccine available very shortly. A couple of years later, he was on his way back from a conference in Europe on a boat, and he met a 36-year-old medical researcher by the name of Jonas Salk. And Salk was kind of a brash, maybe overconfident, aggressive young guy. And he told O'Connor, yeah, I can have one ready for you very quickly and mass-produced very quickly. The two men hit it off. They had an affinity that came on them very quickly. And O'Connor began to pour millions of dollars into Salk's University of Pittsburgh research lab. Salk's team, getting bigger and bigger, worked ferociously over the next few months and very quickly did have a killed virus vaccine. They began to test it on monkeys, hundreds of them, and it seemed to be working very nicely. And then they tested it on a handful of institutionalized children suffering from other conditions. Then Salk vaccinated his own family and then himself. He went to O'Connor and he said, we've got it. And O'Connor decided to initiate a massive test program to decide if this thing would really work. Over the next couple of years, 2 million school children were vaccinated with the Salk vaccine to see if it would work. I just happened to be one of those kids. Let me show you the card I got. I proudly took home and showed my mother, signed by Basil O'Connor. I'm a polio pioneer. I was just about 8 years old when this happened. And they gave us these nifty little pins that we wore proudly on our lapels. Well, about a year went by and everybody waited with bated breath, and the announcement came that the Salk vaccine had been a stunning success. And massive vaccination for this began to take place. Another researcher by the name of Albert Sabin had been working on a different kind of vaccine. These two guys went at it differently. And by 1962, he had a vaccine that you could take orally on a sugar cube. And between these two vaccines and some very close controls and very careful scrutiny from the federal government, everybody got vaccine for polio. And in 1994, the CDC announced that polio had been eradicated entirely from the United States. So when a very powerful and popular president decided to go after a terrible disease and the public got behind him, we did it. We did it very quickly. It's quite a story.